everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing? I personally, little mild food poisoning. That's where I am right now. So if you can imagine the rest of this intro, if you are trying to put yourself in my place, which obviously is what anyone who listens to a podcast does. Obviously just puts themselves in the place of the person talking. It's what I do, any podcast I listen to. But if you are trying to, a little bit of an upset stomach. And do you know what the cure is, though? Well, technically Pepto-Bismol. But also, today's episode, because it was so fun, this is Peyton Pinkerton. If you don't know who Peyton is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Pleasantville, New York, musician Peyton Pinkerton formed New Radiant Storm King in 1990 while at Hampshire College. Over the next 2 decades, the band released 9 albums on labels like Grass, Rainbow Course, and Darla, personal favorite of mine, and in 2010 played their final show. Peyton has also played and toured with Silver Jews, playing on perhaps their best album, The Natural Bridge, as well as with Pernice Brothers. As a solo artist, Peyton has released Rapid Cycler and a self-titled album on Darla, and his last album, X Tomorrow, was released in 2019, and folks, it's a delight. This was very cool to get to talk to Peyton. I've been a fan of New Radiant Storm King since high school. I wish I knew how, because these were the days before the internet. So I obviously had to just either try them out, like I saw the CD at the store in the strip mall near my house, or maybe they were mentioned in the liner notes of something else. I don't know. How else do you find? It's a great name, by the way. New Radiant Storm King is a great name. If you're just scanning the CD stacks looking for something cool. I remember grabbing August Revival. That was the first album of theirs I heard. And then later in college, I got into the Silver Jews and found out that he played on my favorite Silver Jews album. And so I was super psyched to get to talk to Peyton. And oh man, we get into so much in this episode. He talks about dealing with bipolar disorder and his family kind of being on the edges of high society when he was growing up and what that meant. And Peyton is super open and super cool. And we had such a great talk. So I hope you like this episode. And folks, if this is your first episode and you're like, hey, this was interesting. I really like this. It was compelling. I like the word compelling. This was compelling. I want to check out some more episodes. Well, folks, I've been doing this for over 14 years now. What I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended. If you like, hey, if you want, I would say just start downloading episodes. Even if you don't know who the person is, I would say it's always an interesting time. Assuming the guest is open to talking about what the actual show is about, assuming they read the email, then it's always a good time. With that one caveat in there. But also, okay, why don't I recommend some folks in the same realm as Peyton Pinkerton? You know, I've talked to hundreds of musicians and writers and performers and actors and comedians and journalists. But okay, how about some indie rockers, maybe the indie rockers that got their start around the same time as Peyton? Mac McCon has been on the show, Mary Timony, Bob Nastanovich and Spiral Stairs from Pavement, Mark Robinson of Teen Beat Records, and so many bands, Unrest, for example. So why don't you check out those episodes? If you like what you hear, you can subscribe to the show. You can leave a review if you got 10 seconds on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm on social media. Can't help but laugh when I say this. I'm on social media, even though Twitter is owned by a white supremacist who is not shy about disseminating his white supremacist ideals on that platform. But still, every once in a while, it's fun to write a joke there. But mostly I'm writing jokes at Blue Sky, and also pictures of my animals and my wife on Instagram, if that's of interest to you. And all of that is at Andy Beckerman. Coming up on the show next week, amazing talk with longtime TV writer, decades in this business. He is the showrunner of the new Godzilla show on Apple TV, which is really wonderful. and he's written on everything from Mad Men to Sliders. It was such a cool talk. He was so cool. That's next week. Ben Chasney I just talked to from Six Organs of Admittance. That was super cool too. So stay tuned for those, but for now, let's talk to Peyton. You're from New York originally, right? Pleasantville?
Yeah, Pleasantville, New York. Yeah, just about 20 miles north of Manhattan.
So is that like a bedroom community for...
Precisely, for New York, yeah. Kind of like, we used to joke, we were lower upper middle class, basically, surrounded by a bunch of fairly posh towns. But yeah, it was just pretty much nice middle class town. You can, I was very privileged to grow up there, and now I could never afford to live there. It's so insane. Everything's gotten crazy. But when I was there, it was all the towns around us were sort of like the rich kid towns you'd see in the John Hughes movies, where kids would get cars for their 16th birthday, or if they got broke 1,000 on their SAT or whatever. I don't even know if that number means anything anymore. That used to be, it was 1 out of 1,600. So you could, we didn't have that. Like kids, worked, and it was a little more, it was still a really nice place to grow up, but it was simpler, we didn't have like the class act stuff that was going on. In neighboring towns like Chappaqua or Armonk. Anyway, I don't know. I'm going off on this, but I was just reminiscing about growing up there with someone else recently, and it was just a strange place and a strange county, sort of, it to be half an hour outside New York riding horses somewhere. Not that I did that, but that, there could be an estate, in Bedford or Greenwich or places like that, Connecticut was like 5 miles away, the line from me. So we were always in and out of Connecticut, whether or not we wanted to be or not. So we always had a joke that Connecticut was the state in our way. Cause I've lived up here since I was 18, went to college, and, would drive from New York, Massachusetts, back and forth, and never needed to be in Connecticut, and always spent most of my time in Connecticut doing the drive. So, yeah, anyway.
Did the John Hughes stuff make sense to you? Because you say, I was a child when those movies were. So I've never really seen a ton of them. I just know the references.
Sorry that's show my Gen X there. They nailed the like mean preppy guys and they were stereotypes to sure, but they, a lot of it kind of did resonate. And then years later, you look back on it and you're like, wow, that's fucked up. That's sort of like, we're getting into like date rape culture here or something, or potentially, things you would never let go now that back then it just, it's just the way we were. Yeah. We were a bunch of obnoxious kids, but no one seemed too upset by it at the time. And then of course you hear later that, people were miserable and everyone was miserable and getting beaten up and, a lot of that stuff. But, I would say we had Armonk, which is very, expensive town, kind of a lovely Westchester example of, money. And, then to Chappaqua and this Briarcliff Manor and all of those places, those kids had cars, they had Mercedes, BMWs. They'd be driving into our town to see, cause we had the movie theater back then when there was one movie theater for about 4 towns. And you'd see these kids get out and like they smelled different. Like it was money. It was like real money. Like, a lot of cases, old money too. So lots of, I would say, I'll try not to make those references to just, blatant 80s things without assuming, making sure you know what I'm talking about beforehand. But,
I know the references. So. I know most of but like when you were maybe watching that, I was watching G.I. Joe.
Gotcha. Which And, it was about the perfect age for me because I think 16 Candles came out when I was at 14 or 15. So then Breakfast Club after that, Darker, or Pretty in Pink, I was already kind of into harder music by then, but that brought everyone out to the theaters, and they usually had good soundtracks. And, if I was at a later John Hughes movie, it's probably because a girl dragged me there or something. But I liked the first couple when I was a kid. I thought they were, I was like, wow, I can't wait to be in high school. This looks great. The geeks they're all together. They found each other, because I was sort of just wandering in middle school around by myself, really. And, the idea of being in a group in high school, whether or not you were the geeks or the burnouts or whatever, felt nice to me, compared to being an island. But anyway, I don't know how I got off on this. It's just sort of describing, but you can imagine roughly what it's, so that's it. Yeah, basically.
Did
Westchester.
Something newsworthy happen in Chappaqua, or am I just in my brain confusing it with Chappaquiddick?
Well, you could be, that's most likely, but the Clintons moved there, about 20 years ago. And it's always been it'll be referred to, John Cheever, I believe, wrote about Chappaqua. Some other people, it's kind of hard to avoid if you for Westchester society back in the day, that was, when people go into the country, that was it. They drive 20, 30 miles north and be in, a different environment, all before the Depression, of course, and everything changed. But, Chappaqua, also just a really early town, founded by Quakers, and it's where the great Horace Greeley came from. I don't know if you remember. That dates us all if we remember that. I don't think they're teaching about Horace Greeley anymore in school. Westward Expansion, all that, Manifest Destiny, probably not. But yeah. So I always thought that was funny. They had a statue of the famous Horace Greeley, and it was facing east as you would drive past it on the highway, and it's the highway, it's a little parkway really. But, you think the guy who said, was told to go west would be situated facing west. Anyway, my geek is coming out now, so I can just, you have me at a disadvantage and an advantage, because I talk a lot when I'm nervous, but some of it's just ramble, because I have had a couple of procedures where, as I'm saying something that is so crystal clear in my head, halfway through it's like Alzheimer's or something. It just drops off. But I had ECT. I don't know if you know much about the shock therapy. So and it was 3 years ago, but it changed my life, not for the better. And I tend to sometimes, it might seem like I'm stoned, or I'm just struggling for a word, and it's I've just fallen off a cliff, where was I? Okay. So feel free to pick me back up or redirect.
Sure.
Boss me around. Use me for what you need me for.
I mean, do you mind if I ask about that? Just because I don't know if you've ever read or know Tom Sharpling or read his memoir, but he talks about, he had ECT when he was a kid.
No, I've read different accounts, and of course heard the horror stories, which is mostly what you hear. They say it's not the same barbaric thing that it used to be in the 50s, and what you even see in things like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is mid 70s. But what they don't tell you is it only 1 in 3 people really benefit from it. So the other 2/3 have, there's just, there are myriad side effects. And ironically, I don't remember what I was told the side effects would be, because I had the procedure.
Right.
And I don't remember actually agreeing to the procedure. So or being told anything. So yeah, it's been, that's kind of been, a hard thing to get over.
Yeah.
Recurring nightmares about it, things like that. Proximity issues now, certain smells just kind of triggered off, because they would give you this anesthesia, but what they want to do is induce seizure. So before they give you the anesthesia, they give you the shit that's basically like adrenaline times 10, that just, it's like having a panic attack instantly put into your system, your central nervous system, and then they put the mask on. So it was 18 sessions of me going, stop, please help, with this mask being put on and then pushing me down. So it's like, and then I'd wake up. I mean, the shock part was nothing except I had a headache, but it was the prep and the, every time that like, no, stop, please. And not knowing, I somehow thought like I had to do it. So it turned out I had agreed to the whole thing and it was all consensual, but it was part of a greater hospital stay that I had. So, it was sort of the last thing I hadn't tried. I'm bipolar. So that's been, since pretty much after college, kind of I don't want to say it's like guided my life or anything at all, but I've had to work around it in some cases and give into it or be dominated and then, let it kick my ass, come back. I don't know. It's been anything I say is going to sound like some cliche or platitude that people say about it, but it's pretty brutal. And the long stretches of clarity were fine, but then when it comes back, no one has sympathy for you. They're like, wait, you got better. I thought you were, because there's so little understanding about it. So I was hospitalized for that. And after 20 different medicines and combinations of those therein, I've probably tried like 30 medications for this. Sometimes you take up to 7 or 8 or 9 at
the same time.
Yeah. Or stage throughout the day, like your morning meds, your afternoon meds, your evening meds. I've been able to phase some of that out. But, back then I lost a grip on my medication and everything else. And it was COVID and my wife and I were getting to we'd all but said we were going to get divorced, but we couldn't move out. No, neither of us could have moved out because it was the height of COVID. So kind of just a shaky year. And so early 2021, I just went to the hospital.
God.
But, so that was sort of a life-changing event after. I mean, I've had a few other things like that, but this one was, I was in for a while and I was like, this is the last thing I have not tried, I wanted to be able to say I'd at least explored all my options if people had to put up with it and, say like, oh, are you taking your medications? Yes. Well, is there anything else you could be doing? Yeah, I'm exercising, I'm trying to eat right or whatever. But in the end, you're like, and since then they've come out with a lot of other options. So that doesn't have to be one's last option anymore with all the advancements of the psychedelics and stuff and even just different takes on how to address these illnesses sometimes and redefining and, everything's on a bloody spectrum now anyway. So it's like, got like the indicators of like 6 different disorders apparently, but like, I seem pretty okay compared to some of the people I see out there. So, but anyway, so therefore my memory, I might get on a tangent and, it's sort of like drives me sometimes. And like I said, other times it just like drops me off of the curb and I'm like, how'd I get here? Why am I talking about this as we speak?
I mean, I have to imagine how frustrating, I have various friends that are doing, not bipolar, but other various kinds of issues that I've tried this, now I've tried this, and now I've tried this. And they just keep trying different things. And I just see how frustrating it is for them to keep on, year after year trying these different things and it not really doing it. Really kind of hammers home for me how individualistic everything really is. Right. No matter like what kind of issue you're dealing, whether it is a mental issue, whether it's a physical one, it's all very particular to a person. There's like a broad kind of like way you can talk about it. Like this really, I had COVID a couple years ago and it really hammered home to me when I started thinking about like, cause my wife didn't, and I quarantined in the bedroom. And by the time I was supposed to be like not contagious anymore, I was like, well, how do I actually know I'm not contagious anymore? So I stayed quarantined in the bedroom for another week just in case, because it's not like it's a video game. I was thinking about it like this. It's not like that video game where there's like a marker that goes on. That's like, now you're not contagious. There's not a marker that goes on when you're like, well, you're not immune anymore. Like you lost your immunity. There's no like, we just have to kind of like guess at some of these things, you follow the science.
Yeah.
But like, it's really about kind of like your individual biology with whatever you're dealing with. And when the kind of like broad spectrum stuff isn't working for you particularly, it's really, at least for me, and I assume for you, it can be really frustrating.
Oh, yes, very much so. Especially when things work for quite a while and then your body just decides to reject it, to stop metabolizing a certain drug, or the side effects are so horrible that, you just have to get off it. Even if maybe you felt a little happy, you've gained 30 pounds in a year and, you don't feel attractive, you don't feel confident or anything. Or I didn't. I'm using the second person here, but yeah, and you think about things like panic attack alone. You just say panic attack, and anyone who's had one that starts to get that flavor in your mouth, you can remember it almost. Yet just how many different disorders share panic? Like panic, it used to be panic disorder was its own diagnosis, but when I have my manic episodes, they're mostly rooted in panic and an anger, essentially. Not that I'm dangerous or yelling or anything, but it's like it's a very amped up state. But I also feel like, maybe I'm dying, maybe I'm having this heart attack or something. Yeah. Yet I know I've worked with autistic kids. I know people with this and that, and who are recovered alcoholics, and so many people have panic attack in common, yet all different walks of life and all different. So that's just one symptom, but yet so powerful and so, singular. When you say panic attack, there's no mincing about. It's like migraine or heart attack or something. Like anyone who's had it, they're like, yeah, terror in a bottle, slam it down. And, so how the hell do we address things like degrees of depression or morbid depression versus having a good beat on, like, I'm the true cynic. There's I don't know if you ever saw True Detective. Yeah. But in that first episode, the pilot, there's a monologue essentially that, Matthew McConaughey says when he's asked like what his beliefs are. And he's like, you don't really want to know, but okay, here, I'm, and it basically describes my take on it. So people would describe me as a pessimist, but I just think I'm a realist about stuff. But other people can't handle thinking that the world is wrong. So they go down rabbit holes or religious whatever. And just think of there's schizophrenia, there's degrees of schizophrenia, there's cross diagnoses, there's, a lot of people have bipolar, but a little sidecar trait, like a little OCD or HDAD or something like that. And so then and again, it's like once you start seeing all these different camps, you're like, wait, maybe we just need to pull back. And there's like even a greater sort of, maybe it's simpler, but more specific to everybody too. Maybe it's not like, like what's nature versus nurture and ignorance versus human condition, being aware of it. I definitely know people if you ask me about anything current in the news, I won't be able to tell you because I've had to remove that from my life.
Smart.
Cause it just it's not worth it. Life's too short. And I don't want to be worrying about these people and looking back if I live to a ripe old age and being like, oh yeah, I was that whole being upset during, those years of whatever. Then remember, and Fox News dominated the airway. It's like, I could think about that, or I could think about like some cool trips I took or things like that, or walks I took or new mushrooms I discovered, foraging or something, so I cut things out that freak me out, but other people, again, like here I am, I have no idea how I got here, but, If I could rewind, I would, but
No.
I'm lost.
I'm happy to follow you on these tangents because it's
that's cool.
I find them to be interesting. But I am curious though, like when did you first get diagnosed? Because I have to imagine at the very least that first diagnosis was oh, finally I have a name for something for like what I'm feeling.
I didn't get that satisfaction until I was about 39.
Huh.
So I had about 20 years of going. I mean, since I was I had issues as a kid, and early on they had thought I might perhaps be schizophrenic. I was smart but couldn't relate to other kids very well. I was held back in kindergarten of all things, to sort of, because I just wasn't like socially ready for it. But because so many years so it was one thing when I was a kid and all these tests, and then in teenage years, how do you know what's what? And then, right. Things were a lot different in the 80s. It was, quit whining, better read than dead, it was like, boys don't cry. So I was suffering from depression and stuff, but no one could tell me from a different, teenager, except I had these periods where I didn't sleep for 3 days and would be up at night thinking I was going to die and having a heart attack and, getting my ass kicked at school and like the whole periods of shitty things going on. So it wasn't until, I guess, really in my late 30s that I had a significant enough, information to be like, wow, I think this really sounds like what I've been experiencing. And I saw a psychiatrist and they gave me this list of things. It was pretty comprehensive. And out of like 200 questions, I'd say I ticked off like 198 of them in the like bipolar box. So it was just like a hand and glove kind of like fit. The glove did fit in this case. And then went on medication for that and had been on the wrong medication most of my life for different misdiagnoses. So finally being put on standard, at least mood stabilizing medication, like your classic bipolar medication, like lithium is usually what they start with. And then like a sedative for nighttime or for mania or hypomania. Mania sounds like it's, awful, and it can be, but it's like for me or other people, it could be just that you're talking at a really high volume really quickly and very like almost like you're on a lot of coke or something, or if you've seen, someone, or you've probably seen people on manic rants on subways and stuff sometimes. That's like when it gets a little crazier, but you can blend in a little bit. People can just think you're the life of the party even. So your illness can benefit you to a point because it enables you to kind of cover it up. I drank a lot, and like, my years of touring and stuff, because that was just one panic attack if I didn't like just put a, plug in the hole. So, and it was like excessive all the time, but it was definitely like self-medicating. And so when you stop throwing things that are covering up the real symptoms, they come out. And, it was actually sort of in cooling off after a really long tour, a lot of drinking. I'm like, I'm just going to take a break. That's when I just was so depressed and so just despondent. And, that's when I was like, I need to hospitalize myself. I need to figure this out. This is not right. Like one minute I'm, and it had been like that. But again, when you stop putting stuff on it to self-medicate, it's a lot more obvious. Anyhow.
Were your parents sympathetic when you were a kid? Like, did they?
No.
They were.
Whatever you're going to ask me, probably.
They were both teachers, right?
Yeah, they were. And my mother was had been a professional musician and a voice trainer. And she taught piano and vocal lessons in our, people came by the house. And, when I was a kid, no, they didn't understand it. It was, we're pretty preppy, waspy family. It was like, you don't air your stuff out. You don't talk about this stuff too much. And, beside, I think it was also like, I think they just thought I was a real pain in the ass teenager, and they had their issues going on. They probably should have gotten divorced, when I was small and just never left each other. They're still together at 93, and it's a nightmare, dysfunctional, crazy town kind of situation. So, yeah. No, I mean, I'll back up. My mother was supportive, and they both were supportive in their ways, but they weren't supportive in saying, "Oh, we recognize you have your brain doesn't work the way some people's do, but obviously you're different." But they bought me an electric guitar when I asked for one for Christmas. You're going to play it, right? That changed my life. So that was a very supportive thing. I didn't get the emotional support perhaps I needed, but I got, I was brought up in a really good school district. I went to boarding school briefly. I went to some series of private schools. I went to 5 schools in 4 years in high school. So it was kind of, if you do the math, that's kind of weird. But, I was exposed to a lot of stuff. The city, I was, by the time I was like 13, 14, I was allowed to go to the city by myself. That was just about a 40-minute train ride, 3-minute walk from my house, and, Metro North down to Grand Central Station. That was just a magical thing all the time. So, I was allowed, it was weird. As long as I got good grades, which I always did, I was sort of given a lot of slack. So I was going to concerts and stuff in 8th grade, 9th grade, by myself or with other friends without parental supervision. And we knew other kids who were like, "What? Your parents are driving you down to Madison Square Garden and picking you up?" And, like, fuck that. We're going to take the subway and buy beers and, drink beers out of paper bags and stuff. And, the city was wild then. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, pre-Giuliani. Yeah.
Yeah. This is pre-Dinkins. This is like Koch into Dinkins, basically. Kind of what many people would consider the worst, except for maybe the 70s strikes and stuff. But that was, 80s was pretty bad too. But anyway, so yeah, my parents availed a lot of things to me, even though I didn't get the emotional stuff. I got artistic. They gave me the tools to do, like, literally paint and canvas and always lots of art supplies. I had a room I could make. They let me make music and play records loudly and put up with all of that. So, yeah, but no, as far as it was sort of like, how do we fix him? Like, how do we get him fixed? So mainly my father, but don't want to be an embarrassment. I'm supposed to be, very smart. I'm supposed to be successful, and I'm screwing up at 13 or 12 years old for things. And, it's like, you get a B+ on something, and it's like, you're not going to get into the right college. There was that whole sort of thing.
I'm imagining your dad as this kind of like tweed jacket, kind of like upright, very like, we don't do those kinds of things. You just described it, the tweed jacket. He worked at boarding schools his whole life and private schools. He had this very, affable demeanor to everybody else. He's a very charming man, but a real, before he worked at boarding schools, he was actually, you've seen, Full Metal Jacket. Yes. Mm-hmm. That first half an hour that takes place in Parris Island, South Carolina. That's where my father was a drill instructor, just like the guy who gets shot in the end of the first, or sort of Act 1, I guess. Right. Arlie Ermy, is that his name?
Arlie, excellent. Yeah. Arlie Ermy. He's great. But, my dad was a drill instructor. So you had, there was that, but also this tweedy exterior and very, old family kind of bullshit. But, he's kind of a brute to grow up with, not necessarily physically as much, but, no, problems of mine, especially behavioral problems, were things that required my mother's attention to be taken away from him. So if I was at a problem or having issues, I was blocking my mother's affections to him. So I was always like in the way and my problem. So I learned to like just stifle most of my real things. So they didn't know, that I was having these manic episodes up at night, and not sleeping for days. And I was just like, I remember back then you could still get these diet pills, Dexatrim.
Uh-huh.
And, I was like having to take those to go to school, and then I'd be up all night trying to go to sleep and unable to. And, that was definitely early, what they would call hypomania in bipolar land, which is not, it is just what it sounds like, just below mania. Like, it's very often mistaken as being very like busy or sort of the crazed professor type thing. Again, but yeah, it's, I'm sorry, I keep drifting back to that. And I was like, don't talk about the bipolar stuff too much, because it's been a hot topic for the last decade. So people, someone told me it was sexy. And I was like, what?
I don't know about that.
What are you talking about? Like, get the fuck out of here. You don't, no, it was, definitely someone who misunderstood, but, they were sort of expressing that they were sort of attracted to the personality traits. And I'm like, well, everyone's a little different too. And it's no hayride. Or it's an unpleasant hayride. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason I'm curious about it is not to like poke you, but to talk about it in terms of like how it's intertwined with your creative life. Because if it's something you've dealt with your entire life, if you get a guitar as a child, right, I'm sure dealing with these issues is also part and parcel of being a creative person.
It's said that, that a lot of bipolar people are attributed to with creative personalities, considered to be, not necessarily exceptional in some ways, but often, I mean, there's a history. If you reverse that and say, how many creative people do we know who are bipolar or have mental illness, it is pretty astounding. The list. I mean, it's only 2% of the population that have bipolar disorder, but I would guess 1 in 10 musicians I've known have had it. Or some form of serious depression, not just the blues, or not that there's not, all levels of depression are valid and important for people. So I never try to quantify if I sound like I am, but I just try to separate like a chemical thing. You're like, I have no idea why I feel this way, as opposed to something like grief, like I'm responding this way because of a loss. But to feel like you're grieving when you have nothing to grieve about is a very difficult place, and certainly a hard place to get sympathy, or understanding. I never really wanted sympathy, but once I had understanding, I wanted understanding from other people, since it had taken so long to kind of get there.
Yeah.
I would say, my most creative periods have always been during kind of hypomanic areas, or certainly in those spaces in between the highs and lows. When I've been depressed, I'm not able to do very much musically. Maybe like recording or working on someone else's stuff, but like as far as generating my own ideas and songs or anything like that, or touring, things like that can be really hard. But my ex-wife would tell you of the nights where she heard me like write an entire song from the bedroom, kind of annoyed, but kind of like intrigued about how she heard me pick up an acoustic guitar downstairs and play like a few chords. And then she can hear, because my headphones are too loud, because I have no idea. And in the next room, she can hear this whole song that's come together with like drums and things. And there were those, you hear about those stories, and not everyone has them, but yeah, I definitely did. I could read like 3 books at a time, just have a book in every room. And it was like, when I'm in that room, I'm reading that, maybe paint some sideboards, or like, well, I was a terrible painter. I never did that. But, go through the minutia of things, get really, really hyper meticulous, about things. And sometimes it's, just nonsense, but I never wrote a song and finished it and then later said, what the fuck was I thinking? Maybe I was like, what the fuck I was thinking, but I'm still glad I wrote this thing. It was never like, oh, what a huge waste of time. Whereas So yeah, I never mistook something for something not being a good idea. Like if I had a good idea, I thought it was good, I ran with it. And whether or not I was, feeling it somewhere, noticeably feeling symptoms of bipolar disorder, I was still able to, it's not like you hear these stories about people like, I had the greatest idea last night when I was stoned and I wrote it down and I woke up and I was like, what drivel? This is so bad. Uh-huh. Like I never had that. So everything was always valid. It just seemed even more important at the time. Everything was like kind of burning brighter and faster.
Yeah. I get a version of that. Like when I am in the zone writing something, like say a song, recording a song or something like that, right? When I'm in that zone, it's suddenly like 4 or 5 hours go by. Right? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I get a version of that.
Yeah. It's again, I guess mine just sort of, for the last many years, I guess my only job really, other than playing other people's stuff, was writing songs. And calling that a job's a little indulgent, but that's what I was doing.
It's a job. I remember a friend who was a labor organizer and a writer told me, hey, writing is still labor. Just because it's not like coal mining doesn't mean it's not labor.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, a lot of work. It's just amazing how it's so easy to just like endlessly pour all your energy and fixation into this one thing with such passion and then not be able to do that for something that would be so practical. Like if I could put that energy into having been, chosen a different profession, something certainly more lucrative or lasting, I'm thinking you're going to have a career in music at all without a backup is a pretty, that's a pretty brave assumption, brave undertaking if you think you can do that. But, I guess I just, except for that, you're talking about like the 4 or 5 hours, for me it'd be like 4 or 5 days and then come up for air and then kind of crash for a couple days and then go back into it. So it wouldn't be unusual to get up and do some stuff in the morning and then I'd go up in my studio and like 8, 9, 10, 12 hours later. During COVID, it was every day for the first 200 days. I wrote a song every day.
Wow.
Not with lyrics, but I wrote a song as in I put together parts and they start and finish and
right.
have some semblance. Yeah. But, someone else might hear them and they say like, it's just a bunch of instrumentals, but I usually add vocals last. So, it's just like going deeper for longer and kind of having sometimes to rely on someone else to pull you up for air a little bit because you can run a little ragged. I would lose weight,
Oh.
Conversely, when I wasn't creative or especially depressed, which usually would go hand in hand, could gain a lot of weight. So,
but let me go back for a second because it feels like a contradiction for a little bit. When I imagined who your father was, and then you also say he was a drill instructor in the Army.
Right. Marine Corps.
Marine Corps. Okay. So, how does he go from because I imagine that he was just like part of like a blue blood type family. But where's he? Is he enlist? Does he?
Yeah.
What is going on there? Like, what's his family background?
Well, it's an old family on both sides, but we described ourselves as old money lost. So basically, my grandfather lost everything in the Great Depression.
Oh.
Before that, they would have been considered like sort of Hudson Valley society. So my father was raised with all these antiques and everything around them, but they didn't have, actual money. They didn't belong to country clubs. They didn't, but their friends did still. So they were kind of carried. What happened was World War II and my uncle, who's 8 years older than my father, joined and through the Marine Corps, and he was a hero in the Pacific. He fought at Peleliu and Okinawa, Iwo Jima. He was like several islands all in the Pacific theater and came back kind of a hero. And my father didn't have a war and kept waiting, and he missed Korea. He was too young, and then he went, and so he was in between Korea and Vietnam. I think that was like for him to prove his, there's sort of a long history of military involvement too in my family. If you go back to like Civil War, or the Revolution, or even back to like Scotland and Ireland, even the Troubles in Northern Ireland. My family goes back to a lot of that stuff. Where the Pinkertons emigrated from, Belfast. But the two can exist. The warrior and the, Mr. Chips or whatever, Mr. Tweed suit. I don't know. Do people read that anymore? Goodbye, Mr. Chips. That's probably a really old reference.
I know it only because Breaking Bad was conceived of as going to take Mr. Chips to Scarface. So I had to learn who Mr. Chips was to understand the log line.
So there you go. Yeah. But, being in charge of young boys versus slightly older boys,
right.
And bunks and all that, discipline, regimen, schedule. It's all the same. I think he was, at heart, I think he, was a little soft, actually. I think he didn't stay in for very long, missing Vietnam. I think he thought about, there are a couple guys who did kill themselves there, and it happened a lot, and it got covered up, or just not spoken about very much. And I think that he wasn't really the hard guy. He was training these other people to be something that he himself wasn't really, but he was good at instruction, and he could walk the walk, so they didn't know his background. He was just this son of a bitch, mean ass drill sergeant, a drill instructor at the island. And, that in itself is sort of a status symbol, because it's like his friends probably went for officer, and, but you're never in the trenches. And these are the, as far as non-commissioned officers, a drill instructor, sergeant, is sort of considered very often the wisest in the way. You always hear them about saying, like, stay away from the lieutenants and the captains. They're the ones who'll get you killed. Mm-hmm. With their crazy ideas. And, that's the job of the drill instructor, is to train you to be ready and to be a real son of a bitch, so that when your time comes, your fear is sublimated and all that crap. But as we know now, more veterans have PTSD and shit than ever, not just from battle, but from training and, the systematic abuse that still exists in a lot of the armed forces or certain sects, I guess they probably stopped a lot of that just from media coverage. But remember the one where they like pinned when you got your wings? I can't remember what branch it was of the service, but when you get this pin after you completed it was like jump training or some like 12-week hell thing, they pinned it to your chest, literally like slammed it into your sternum. And that was like the rite of passage, and like some reporter went underground. Yeah, it's kind of gross.
And that's like some English boarding school type shit.
Oh, English boarding school, way more, that would be meaner and smarter. This is like, bullet head, like, sure, fire me out of a cannon into a brick wall. Go ahead. Just like, pure machismo without, I guess. But, anyway, it's, so yeah, I think that made for an interesting character in him.
So then how does he get back into quote unquote high society from there?
Oh, by teaching their children. He never got back into it. We grew up in his friends never came to our house. There was nothing wrong with our house, but it was a modest colonial on a nice street with small yards. I mean, it almost, if you think of like a middle American sweet kind of cute street that has, people with not huge yards, colonials, that's like what would come to mind. You would be seeing my street essentially with a church at the top of and everything. So, he ended up, working at the school in the city for a while. My mom, teaching at Long Island in the 60s. And, I don't know. Well, I can tell you one thing that certainly kept him in society was, some of his dad's old friends and families throughout Westchester, as well as, the fact that I guess, Nelson Rockefeller, was vice president briefly when Ford was president, when Nixon had resigned, and his son was going to a school in the city that my father was the headmaster at. So they had, Secret Service men who would stand outside every classroom this kid was in. And then finally he graduated, but my father had become friends with the Rockefellers, and my grandfather knew their father. So there was kind of this, it was like you could imagine him blending in with some of these social elites, but then he'd like park his, Chevy Citation under a tree far away. So a drive home to our house from having hung out with, some of the old Hudson Valley families and their descendants. That world is largely lost now, but it's just funny. I actually happen to have the, Zippo that when this kid, Mark Rockefeller, left school to go off to, whatever, it was like cut off at 9th grade. So he went to high school and the Secret Service guys were leaving. So they gave my father this lighter, which is probably hard to see, but
I see it with like a silver star on it.
Yeah, it's got the, it's a Zippo with the Secret Service thing, which is kind of funny because, Alan B. Pinkerton is a distant relative of mine, and he was essentially started the Secret Service, or what would become the Secret Service. He was an aide to Lincoln and for information. And
I know about the Pinkertons.
Yeah. Well, see,
those Pinkertons. I mean, Pinkerton as a synonym for detective. Yeah.
Detective or thug or what have
strike
you.
breaker.
Yeah, horrible. Yeah. Fortunately, the company didn't stay in the family name, so it's not like those people out there blowing up the buildings were, blowing up the mines in West Virginia and things with the striking workers in them were my actual great uncles and stuff. It's just, but the name does have sort of a little bit of infamy connoted with it. But yeah, it's always caused me problems because I think my name, people assume I have money, and I've always been, I remember going to Hampshire College where everyone just dressed, in 1989, it was like the beginning of grunge really. And, everyone was just in ripped jeans, flannel, and all this crap. So you didn't really know anyone's background except by their name or perhaps what their address was in the student directory. And people saw Peyton Pinkerton, Sunnyside Avenue in Pleasantville, New York. Oh my God, he must be, and it's hilarious. You'd go to someone's house and you'd be greeted by their maid, and people would come to my house and it's like my mom's in the kitchen making dinner and stuff. So you didn't really know what people's financial backgrounds really were, unless they had like a famous last name that you knew meant money. I won't mention any, but yeah,
Rockefeller, Vanderbilt.
Well, there you go. There you go. Yeah. Yes. The other,
the old money, as opposed to like the new money people, like the Koch brothers, the Mercers,
right.
Who's the Nazi guy that paid for Clarence Thomas, him.
Right. Yeah. No, I guess it's more like Getty's and things like
Getty's
that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That's interesting. It really, because you just telling, these couple stories about your dad, I know the kind of psychology. I kind of get it. I see, assuming that what he wanted in life was to ascend back into that society, because it seems like that was part of it, and then no, he never, he was,
but did he
want to?
Under the pretense, I think he resigned himself to the next best thing. It's kind of like the church we went to. My mother was a Quaker. He was Episcopalian, so I alternated, went later, but he chose to, I mentioned the town Armonk. He chose to go, we had an Episcopalian church at the top of our street we could walk to, but we drove 10 minutes over to the next town because it was wealthier. And I realized his church he wasn't a religious man. That was his like poor man's country club because these people were rich. So we would get invited to the Whippoorwill Country Club after church. We had brunches at people's houses. And again, the same thing. So I was even kind of raised this way with like, see, like all these are all the people you should be friends with. These like, this preppy lot here. And yet, I mean, I almost thought that my town, it's ridiculous now because it seems such a posh town, but I remember thinking like, wow, we're kind of like, I wasn't ashamed of where we're from, but when I went to some of my friends' like townhouses in Park Avenue and things in boarding school or, out in some of these mansions out in Greenwich, Connecticut. My house was this little tiny, house made along with a bunch of other houses and, turn of the century and, nothing exceptional there. Cute, but yeah, just not, but yeah, I think in the end, my father cared far more about just being in proximity to it. Maybe exposing me, like maybe I can get back into it if he missed his chance, maybe, but the thing is, at the end of the day, what my father never reckoned with was nouveau riche and the power of new money and how it could just totally, erase what some people regard as proper aesthetics or decorum and all sorts of things, how you comport yourself. So society didn't really matter anymore. Suddenly it was just money. So you still have these old families and they don't really give a shit about, their money. They wear sweaters that have holes in them or like might sew their own button back on their shirt. Yet they have a couple million and, at any time they want. And then there's these other people like putting lions and fountains in their front yards and building these giant McMansions. So I think when he saw that, he realized that kind of old money just isn't around anymore, really. I mean, and not certainly to the degree it was, even when I was in,
school. You're a kid basically at the time where that shifts from being this kind of like in the 1970s. I don't know the whole story. I've been trying to put it together, but the 1970s, that's when it like the old money kind of like, I guess there's like the investor revolution and you have all these like all the nouveau riche, which doesn't have any of the, look, I'm middle class. I come from middle class stock. I come from working class stock grandparents, right? So I have no investment in this. If I have to pick a side, I'm going to pick the old money side because at least they have taste. But the nouveau riche people come in, and that the whole like 80s Wall Street type stuff. Then through this whole investor revolution, and then like I think it's 82 or 84, like stock buybacks become a thing, and so it just becomes the consolidation of wealth that we are now living in the collapse of. That starts when you're a kid, and your dad is watching it happen, and I just wonder if he's like, I don't know. I'm just trying to imagine like this, like what his emotional state is, especially you described him as waspy, and I'm like, so he has this whole emotional state of like being this kind of like, I'm always just going to be in proximity to wealth. Maybe my son can ascend, but at the same time, I'm watching all the kind of mores of the society that I want to be part of be washed away.
That's it. That's exactly it. You hit it on the head. Yeah. So like he realized what he was striving for the whole time was only a temporal thing anyway. It was not forever. It was not the Roman Empire, like these names will be forgotten in history way faster than I think any of us think, too. Like going back, just looking at one of my friend's kids' history books, it was like, wow, we're really not going too far back anymore. But yeah, that's exactly it. He saw what it was and recognized that sort of, he already had the thing that I think what he wanted, the only thing really missing was the money. We all had great dinner manners. We all had decent clothes. I had Brooks Brothers hand-me-downs and stuff, It wasn't like, off the rack, tailored shit, but it was, we could look the part and all that, but in the end, it was just that like we couldn't pick up the bill for everybody at the restaurant, or we couldn't, we didn't have the nice car. We just didn't have the material goods. But, we had a lot of other stuff, I think, and I think he wasted a lot of time chasing it just to realize that in the end it was money and that your state of mind about your family and what's, if you want to think of yourself as a noble, go ahead. If that's how you need to, or like, say I have noble blood or whatever, like, if that's important to him, he could have realized now, like he had it all along, and, the money never came into play anyway. I would say being around so many rich people, other than getting some good meals and things, I never benefited from it. I never got a hot stock tip. He certainly never got, I think at the end of the day, he'd realize, you should go out the staff entrance, sir. You're the, again,
Whoa.
But, he obviously didn't get that, but there was, it's, I have a hard time trying to remember what it was like because I'm just very different in as far as, financial stuff. But, it must have just been kind of maddening, to sort of want something that you can't have and to not realize what you have. And we could all say that about lots of things, I suppose. But like you said, someone chasing it all their life, suddenly to realize that even if they had it, it's a vanishing thing.
Yeah. So were you keyed into this when you were a kid? Like, did you feel this in the air in terms of like empathizing? I mean, literally, I don't mean like empathizing, like, oh, I empathize with you, but I mean like literally like being like your antenna up, keyed into your dad's feelings. Or were you like, because you were dealing with your own issues, it was just happening and you were kind of like walled off from what he was feeling? Because I'm just wondering, how do you develop in relation to this man in your life?
Oh, well, I guess I would say I was a reaction to him. That's what, but, I bought into the whole, like, oh, we used to joke, we're not Mayflower. We came over before. We came over for Jamestown almost 100 years earlier. So, I was made aware of, like, we have some interesting figures in my family tree, and we're white privileged people who had access to genealogical records going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, only because that was what affluent people were able to do, is have,
Right.
I went to school with friends who didn't know what their great grandparents looked like because they got wasted in the Holocaust, and like, a huge chunk of people just had no family tree after a point, or lucky to have like one remnant of somebody to remember them by. But, I'm like, okay, that's really interesting, but that doesn't make me any different. And I'm still broke and, got my paper route and shit. Like, like every kid did, I thought at least, just have a paper route, it's expected. It's like your 5th grade job, your first real job other than mowing lawns and stuff. But, I think by the time high school and punk rock and everything kind of hit me, or I say punk rock, but I even kind of technically missed the hardcore sort of aftershocks of punk rock. So it was really what they would call, I guess, post-punk and the new wave of music that affected me. But, none of that was about money really, except for the people, snorting lines of coke on their yachts in the videos and stuff with chicks in bikinis. We were into, music that didn't glamorize wealth, but, in some ways kind of played it down, if not decried it in some cases. And, everyone was like toying with communism and socialism back then, at least in my weird little group of friends we were, because, everyone is telling us, it's the worst system in the world. It's horrible. And yet, we knew what we had wasn't working. And it was a great way to be, like really piss someone off, would just be to wear like a hammer and sickle pin. I remember I had a Lenin shirt, a Lenin t-shirt which now I would not wear, knowing how many people he did kill. And, I mean, I wouldn't wear any shirt of a mass murderer, but, man, what a great reaction. Because it was either people wanted to punch me or I knew who was really stupid because they weren't offended by it at all. And then one day a teacher made me take it off. And I remember I had to go change, get my gym clothes on, or my gym shirt out, my stinky gym shirt, because I couldn't wear my Lenin shirt in school. I had, maybe it was the Mickey Mao one too. I had one that was Chairman Mao, but someone had put ears on them and it was Mickey Mao. And yeah, same thing, and he killed like 60 million people or something, but
yeah. Did you carry out a little red book?
Yeah, exactly. That's like, yeah, I know he's the Hall of Famer. But
okay. So where does music come in? Where does you wanting to make music come in?
It's so corny, but it's, I was 4 years old and my older sister and brother, who were 16 and 17 years older than me, respectively, were babysitting me, and the Beatles' Hard Day's Night was on. And that was it. I saw that. I was 4 years old. I wasn't even thinking about women, but I saw those girls chasing them and trying to rip their clothes off and them running everywhere and those chords and this, I mean, it's as boring as it gets. I mean, to say the Beatles, but it's where it all started for me. And, that was also one of the things that was everyone in my family agreed on. Lots of strong musical opinions in my family, but before I was born in the 60s, when they'd be arguing about what to listen to on the radio, the rule was if it was the Beach Boys or the Beatles, they'd leave it on. As opposed to those Rolling Stones with their drugs and all that. My parents hated them, but
Beatles,
my siblings
never touched a drug in their life.
No. John Lennon, not a dangerous man at all in any way. But, and that was it. My brother played guitar. My sister played bass and sang. Everyone sang. I mean, I was in choirs, early age. I took piano lessons. I don't really remember much of that. I hated that. I hated lessons so much. But I guess I just kind of just dove into anything musical as soon as I was able to join like orchestra, like maybe second grade. I think I remember they gave you all these sound tests and, is this note higher than the other one and all that. And I totally aced it because my mother did scales with her vocal students. La, 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 la. So, I knew what sounds were, but, I got whatever I scored well so I could pick whatever instrument I wanted to play. I'm like, I want the oboe. And they're like, no, you'll get beaten up. They're like, look. And it was like, seriously, like even back then we knew like the one kid who was like, we didn't know he was gay, but we knew he was different. My teacher certainly knew this kid was different. And he said, look, and then he pointed to the flute section, and the only boy in the flute section was someone who also was like sort of shunned and maybe later turned out to have I have no idea what happened to them, but they basically said like, no, boys really shouldn't play the oboe. Or the flute. So no. What's your second choice? And I was like, fuck
no
it.
famous male oboist. No one in jazz ever plays any of these instruments. No male.
Well, I guess, did Eric Dolphy maybe bust out an oboe now and then? No.
There's so many. Sorry. It's just, I'm just like, it's okay. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Well, it's 1979, maybe in 1980. Probably 80. And, but the thing was the music I was listening to, I didn't like jazz, although we had a lot of jazz in the house on a lot. I didn't like it yet. I would add later. I obviously loved it and I was happy that I was exposed to so much of it. But to me as a working musician, if you were going to have to be in an orchestra pit, I wanted to be in like classical orchestra pit, and the oboe I knew from Baroque music and my mother explaining stuff to me. And, we would listen to that Peter the Wolf record with the narration. It's like the clarinet is represented by, So I could pick out instruments and things. And I was like, great, oboe, no. All right, saxophone. Right then, I didn't know that changed my life right there and closed so many doors down. It didn't have to. But instantly, it was like, I realized 2 years later, I couldn't read music, but the teacher would play our parts first, and then we'd run through it, and I just could memorize. I could pick out the line once I heard it. So I wasn't turning the pages on time and stuff. But I realized, holy shit! Like, yeah, if I was playing oboe right now, I could have, could be playing this and this and I realized I was only going to be in the orchestra pit for for musicals and stuff. You're not going to be playing, Chopin or Bach or anybody with a saxophone, I mean, granted, you probably wouldn't be adding oboe to anything before it was invented, but, English horn, all those very kind of nasally reedy instruments, that they really just have their place in an orchestra, but you're not going to go out and be a solo oboist. Someone will listen to a Kenny G record start to finish with no accompaniment, but give them an oboe record, I think you'd go nuts pretty quickly. So yeah, I ended up doing sax at alto. I got bored with that, and they bumped me up to tenor, and that was cool. And then I remember they were like, "You want to try the baritone?" I was like, "Yes." And it was almost as tall as I was. And those were the days, even though I lived maybe not even half a mile from the school, my mother would have to pick me up and drop me off on weekends so I could bring the baritone saxophone home. But I remember thinking that, that was my earliest experiments with distortion, because when you blow those really low notes, it sounded like a distorted, fuzzed out bass.
Right.
And I'd be like, wow, is that like on, like Come Together or something? Or like there'd be sounds, I listen to lots of records from the 60s, inheriting all my siblings' records, but, I didn't know what effects made what sounds, but I remember the baritone was like, yeah, this thing's like, it's got like some hair on it. I didn't use that term then either, but, I didn't even know distortion was, a pedal or a way you set an amplifier up, but, yeah. And then it abruptly ended. I went to boarding school, went to the orchestra, and very quickly I went from first chair. I'd moved back to tenor to almost non-existent because they realized I couldn't read music, and the whole thing started over again. And they wanted me to take remedial theory and composition. I was like, it was going to have to be during my free period. And it was like, so I was like, fuck it, and I was playing guitar by then anyway without lessons. So, it just, I didn't want to play Hello Dolly.
Right.
I mean, I like Hello Dolly. I'd go see Hello Dolly, but I don't want to be in the pit for Hello Dolly or something. So,
okay. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I am curious. What is the tipping point to where you go from I'm playing other people's music to I want to write my own music? Because that to me, I ask this to most of my guests because it's really fascinating to me, because there are plenty of people who would just keep playing, saxophone, like, whatever, playing along to, I wish I could think of any band that has a saxophonist in it.
Men at Work.
I'm going to play along to the E Street Band. I'm going to play along to some Bruce Springsteen songs or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But no, I'm going to write my own music. What was that tipping point?
The tipping point was the fact that back as a guitarist, a very novice guitarist, there were about 3 songs you had to fucking learn right away. One was Stairway to Steven. God, that's my Butthole Surfers reversal. Stairway to Heaven.
We had to learn Butthole Surfers when we were...
It's one of my favorite bands still, I'd say. And they had a saxophone at points, so there you go. But, and fuzzed out bass. The thing was, I was horrible at reckoning between the tuning of my guitar. I could tune my guitar, but we didn't have tuners. And my brother showed me this method with a tuning fork, and you hit it and then put it on. And so I just would tune the guitar. But because of this, I couldn't learn a song off the radio because I wasn't in A440 tuning.
Right.
My open E chord, first position, was sharp. It was more like an F sharp or an F, or some, it was off by just enough that I'd be like, how the fuck does it? So I got so frustrated with trying to figure out other people's songs that I just started writing my own, probably in like 6th grade.
Wow.
And, the first thing I did was I didn't write it, but I knew part of my band had their talent show gig, like 6th grade, first time with electric guitar in front of everybody and drummer and a singer. And, I knew part of Pat Benatar's Hit Me With Your Best Shot. This song, it sounds funny, but it was a big song at the time. This band called Toronto, had a song called Your Daddy Don't Know, then parentheses, What Your Mama's Gonna Do Tonight.
What?
And then there was this band, Quarter Flash from Canada, and they had a song they had 2 hits. One was Hard My Heart, but the other one is called Find Another Fool. And I knew each of these songs up to a point, but when there'd be like a minor chord I didn't know on, everything was just major bar chords for me, or like just flat 2 fingers, or, the cowboy chords as we called them, just the beginner chord. Yeah, exactly. Farmer's Corner is what they call that in Nashville. But I'm like, but they're all in the same key. They all work. They all have the same chords. So I wrote this medley of it, and it was like, or I arranged a medley, I should say. So if Pat Benatar into this other song, a year later, it would have meant nothing because no one would have known the other 2 songs other than the Pat Benatar song. But, I think that was, that's when I realized, you can do stuff with other people's music too and be creative. But at that point, I would want to learn stuff to learn just to do it, just to have chops, and just because that's how you get better is just by playing. But for me, it was like anything original that felt right. I couldn't really sing other people's songs very well. So I just, I'm still not a singer first and foremost by any means. I don't think many people would argue with that. But I sing because I had to write songs, and in writing the song, I had to write the words, and then I'm like, well, I can sing. You don't know what you're doing, or this is how it goes. And it's like, and, I know I probably turned down better singers to be in bands with at points, opting for myself to sing. But, it was because, so I'd say by high school, I'd learn a song by The Cure or something for fun, but it was all just, I was writing songs by then and playing. I was always in a band after 6th grade. Always in some kind of band. And, we always called them, everyone talks them garage bands, but where I lived, they were all basement bands. Cause if you played in your garage, neighbors would complain. So yeah, man, I played in basements all over Westchester County, all through high school, right up until college, basically. I was even when senior year of high school, and, my friend went to a nearby college. He was a year ahead of me. He went to SUNY Purchase. So that was like having a friend in college, your senior year in high school. So always a party on the weekends, but we formed a band with people there. And so I was like suddenly playing with people a lot better than me, a lot crazier than me. And that kind of really got me the bug. After that, I was like, I was already accepted into college, but I was like, I really want to do this. Like, so when I went to college, I was already like, I say I was there for that 60% academia and 40% rock and roll, maybe 70% academia, but I definitely, like, a band was going to figure into that. And it was no coincidence that I knew the Pixies had come out of the same area, and that Dinosaur, I call them Dinosaur Jr., were not only a local band from Amherst, but when I went to visit the college, Hampshire College, which is only two miles down the road from the, fan mail address on the cassette of this Dinosaur record on SST. So I made my dad turn down, and, it was just this suburban street, little ranch houses and stuff. But I remember thinking that, so yeah, I think I chose this musically kind of rich area. At least it seemed to be that way at the time. Knowing that, I want to go to college. I want to like figure out a profession at some point, but not now because I want to do music. And I want to learn a bunch of shit that maybe makes me better at music too. But certainly, you know, I mean, I ended up studying, I tried music for a third time, by the way. I got into one music class and got through that. And then when it came to theory and composition, I can't do it. People have said, I'll pay for you to like study this. And I'm like, I don't have dyslexia and I wouldn't want to compare something else to dyslexia, but the notes on the staff do move around for me. It doesn't seem logical, even though I never could relate to it. I never could sight read. It never felt natural. So, but that did block me out of the very experimental music program at Hampshire. So ironically, I was signed to a record label my sophomore year with my band, with New Radiant Storm King. But I'd been kicked out of the music department and we were touring by that point. We were going off on weekends. That was more like our third year, but yeah, we were like going off on weekends, playing like Boston and Philly and then coming back all tired and going to class again. And yeah, and like, nope, I have a record out. And then I'm like, you still can't get in the music program. So I ended up doing fine arts and philosophy basically. And so I know you, I did a triple major. It was, fine art, which was mostly painting, art history and semiotics. So it was like kind of this, and I noticed you had been a philosophy, chap.
I was a professor. In Philadelphia for a while.
Wow.
Yeah. It's,
the Steve Martin quote, in college you learn just enough philosophy to fuck you up for the rest of your life is sort of applicable.
100%. And then I kept going, and then I kept getting more and more philosophy to keep fucking.
You got to stop with the Scandinavians. Once that, it's too dark after Kierkegaard. It's like,
I kept going. I kept going. Oh, a Nazi philosopher, Heidegger? Sure.
Heidegger. Hegel? Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I love Heidegger. I mean, not the person. The person was a piece of shit, but his philosophy, pretty good.
Hegel and Heidegger, I think both were pretty fascinating chaps. But yeah, do you know William Barrett? Later, more existential. He's an American 20th century guy. He married my second cousin once removed. Basically, my dad's cousin's mother or something. I can't remember how it works out, but he wrote the Irrational Man. That was his big book, and that actually was pretty popular for a philosophy book, or essays or treatises anyway. But yeah, so yeah, I did this triple major, which in the end, of course, none of which was going to make me money. The art, no philosophy, no art history, image and text, I mean,
by that point, were you already like, well, look, I'm just doing music. This is where I'm going. This is the direction. This is what fulfills me. I have found some success in it. So that's the direction I'm headed in.
Success, except for the money part. But yeah, I think getting recognized in the early 90s when it was still sort of, there were just fewer bands. There were just fewer bands to see. So it's just a little more, I just knew it was all I could do. And I'd been able to make enough money just to keep doing it a little more till I would get broke again and then make a little more. So, this is like college and the touring years, certainly for Storm King. Other bands I played with later was, financially far more rewarding, not necessarily, crazy money, but, certainly taken care of, no worries kind of stuff. The Storm King, I mean, some of our touring was crazy, like not eating for 2 days and having to raid the Fixings bar at Roy Rogers at road stops because the Fixings bar was free. So we take napkins. We called it the horse chest, it's horseradish salad. And you just take a bunch of napkins, lettuce, tomatoes. Yeah. Dump the horsey sauce or whatever that stuff is they have. Maybe it's Arby's too. I'm just trying to remember. We had all these sort of early hacks without actually stealing. But, so that kind of starvation level, some of that touring puts everything in perspective, I think. I'm really glad I did that because I know people who never had to sleep on floors or any of that. They got signed in their 30s and, you know, their first tour, they're staying in, you know, motels. Maybe they have a roommate or a hotel, but like, you know where you're staying every night. You're getting fed, you're getting paid, like contracts. I'm glad I went through all that and touring without cell phones. And I know I sound like I'm old man on my porch, but
no.
It made for
I remember it.
An exciting period. Yeah.
Final question though.
Absolutely.
Was there ever a point where your parents got what you were doing?
Yes. And it's sort of bittersweet. When I did the first Pernice Brothers record, Overcome by Happiness, it came out in 98. I brought that home to them. And before that, I'd given them my records. Storm King, they didn't understand some of the dissonance and the distortion. Silver Jews, my dad actually liked The Natural Bridge, but he thought he wasn't that, he was more impressed with the lyrics, which actually shows he had a brain, than he was with the music. But when I gave them the Pernice Brothers Overcome by Happiness, I think, well, both of them, but especially my father was like, aha, okay, he's not a fool. Cause I don't think they even understood. They're like, I don't think they even thought I was very good. I think they thought that I was chasing this life that I was never going to have because they didn't understand the value in what I did. So they thought it was just, nonsense. And, they heard that record, but I was like, that's the one record I had the least real attachment to in my heart to, and not to be contentious or anything, but wasn't really at all. I mean, to me, that was me trying to learn to play like an old 60s record and all the stuff we'd grown up with and the Bach rock and all that. So I'm like, oh, so my dad's like celebrating and buying for all his friends and family members. And I'm like, I didn't really have, I didn't write these songs. I sing a little bit here. You can hear, it's not really a guitar record even. So, it's kind of like that. Whatever they liked the most of mine was usually what I liked the least. So, or had the least involvement or could take the least credit for.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because of their age, they never got to see me live with anybody. So they never got to see me play. But I think, at least in a live setting, it would have come across, but even, they weren't going to go to like, Mercury Lounge or, right. Bowery Ballroom or something. I mean, there was a period when I guess I could have gotten them a table if I'd thought about it, but that would have been money out of my pocket probably. So, but I do regret that they didn't see that, but.
The venue can't give you 2 tickets for your parents?
Well, when you're not, the band leader or the manager, you really, your guests you're given a few guests, but you're not really supposed to go too crazy. And something like a New York show, you already have friends you forgot about asking to be on guest lists. So right. Guest lists are always a problem. And you could tell, spread the word. Guest lists, just pay. It puts everyone through. It makes bands fight. Seriously, I've seen so many arguments about like who is going to get into this or that, and like, wait, I've got a friend coming down. You're telling me the show's sold. That's the worst. If the show's sold out, no one is on the list, or it's industry people who could pay, or sometimes the occasional celebrity or something. Yep. I remember Moby. I don't mind dissing this guy, but this guy got on. Had clearly no interest in our show because he talked throughout the whole thing, but he brought 8 people. I'll always remember that. Moby plus 8. And I had a friend from North Carolina who didn't know we were playing, happened to be walking down Houston and bumped into me in New York and was like, holy shit, I'm playing right. And I couldn't get him in because Moby people were there. Plus eight. Moby plus 8. Yeah. And, he probably said something to somebody like, I'm considering producing them. Like, he doesn't even have to check with us. He just he just, he was never, well, there's a story behind it. There's a reason to it. It wasn't just random, but, it wasn't really, it was only one person in the band who wanted him there and not someone who really should be making the calls. So it was more of a star fucker kind of thing. Like, oh, I know Moby, so I'm going to invite him to our show, as opposed to like, oh, I'm interested to know this guy, or he is a producer. Like, that could have been something interesting, but instead it was, and just,
I got my own problem with Moby.
Yeah.
He owned a vegan restaurant here. That's like 10 minutes away. My parents got me and Naomi a gift certificate for like Valentine's Day there. And then they shut the restaurant down before we could use the gift certificate.
Oh,
so he got my parents' money and then just took off. And I didn't get any vegan chicken piccata or whatever.
Yeah. He grew up about half an hour away from me, just over in Connecticut. He's like a Darien, Connecticut boy. Same town as Clint Connolly from Mission of Burma.
Oh.
Which is why he destroyed that song. Well, destroyed means is good nowadays, to destroy a song. That means you killed it. But when I heard him cover, I didn't mean this to be a bash Moby moment, because there's plenty worse people, but he did. That's when I reached for my revolver, which is a very near and dear song to me. And to hear that covered, just, those 90s covers, man, just like, well, I ran out of my own idea, so let's just do that still goes on, obviously, all the time, even as we speak, with the Beatles and stuff and all this,
Moby, if you're listening, give my parents their $75 back.
Yeah, I would say so. And, fortunately, I don't hear too much about him anymore. I saw a picture of him and I thought it was Michael Stipe. And I saw a picture of Michael Stipe and I thought it was Moby. And I was like, it was a while ago. But
they're converging.
At one point, they crossed over a little bit. I know I talked a lot and I didn't necessarily talk about any of the stuff I wrote down that I thought we might, to make sure to keep me on track.
Wait, what'd you write down?
Oh, no, it was just sort of guidelines. It wasn't anything like, I was just like, if I needed a story or whatever, or just some influence it's really just a couple notes to keep me from straying too much. Or like when you said I was waiting, I'm like, I hope he asked me why I started writing my own songs. And it's because I couldn't play other people like that. I just didn't. And I'm like, make sure to write that down, because I always forget to say that. I always come up with something that sounds more pretentious and overthought. And it's that simple. And,
I wanted to be the Bach of my generation.
Right. No, I wanted to fucking play and talk to attractive people and smoke cigarettes and look mysterious.
Sure.
Basically. Attractive people as in not necessarily physically, but, mystique, that sort of thing. The music crowd,
Charismatic folks.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's any. I think everyone's geeky when you get down to it. But
Peyton, this was an absolute delight. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you. And take care out there. Enjoy the monsoon.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.